Okay, let's get started. We'll shift to Hepdig, and Hepdig does several things that we miss in Bourdieu. And the putting together the two of them, we have many more tools and ways of thinking together, or at least seeing how they can be put together in a more in different ways. The writing is originally in English, and the writing has a wonderful, subtle innuendo, contrasting of themes and feelings and emotions of how these are put together within a single sentence, where it has a lot in 2 lines. By contrast, for instance, I worked with Bourdieu, as I said, for 5 years. He probably wrote 10 books in 10 years. And so I'd read one book with it. I'd say, Peter, this is just sloppy stuff. Why don't you put in some propositions? And even if it's, Jean-Paul Sartre, he wrote with clear, specific language. And you've got stuff that came from somewhere, from Germany or whatever. Why don't you have some propositions? Okay. So then the next book he sent to me, inscription, to Terry, here's a book filled with propositions. So I turned to page 12, and here's the sentence was a page and a half before there was a period. So it has 27 different ideas, sort of, and I would say ideas, 27 different words, or 600 words, and it's just a confused set of ideas. Or I won't say, I'm overstating, but that is, it wasn't clear and specific as some other people, even Jean-Paul Sartre. That is, the style of writing in France was until the 40s and 50s, it was to be very clear and articulate French, and that changed and Bourdieu could occasionally do that, but usually did not. And so I give you the example of what he called a proposition was almost a teasing illustration. What we have with Hepdig is a second point. Change and class. Clearly, he talks about that the big theme in this selection from the book is to deal wonderfully with the overlaps between and within and around, as he puts it, the transference of values and meanings still holds when we talk to British youth cultures. Nonetheless, it should hardly surprise us that the beat subculture alone, the product of a somewhat romantic alignment with black people, should survive a transition from America to Britain to the 50s. Okay, that is, or as he put it in the next quote, from class, from sex, and from personality, there was an obvious commitment moved away from these class, sex, and personality to fantasy. So he points out. There are many subtitles, bits of music, themes, people whose names he mentioned. You may not know, but one was to look at different aspects within the British musical changes, and then to try to see where and why it is changing and how much it could be. See, he mentions, is it class, sex, and personal? Less and less, and that the introduction is done in a subtle way in the changes of style of music and the lyrics and the themes within British popular music, we can call it, to simplify. He doesn't talk about Bach and Beethoven or Wagner. And he in this chapter, at least this section that we read, he only starts in roughly the 50s and 60s. Just a little before that, there were beginnings of within England an alienated sub-style which was in film. But there were a number of film artists who were in Hollywood and part of World War II, and then with McCarthy. With McCarthy, a couple of them left Hollywood and went to England. And this style of the mixing together of bringing American themes, and which had been initially, what's the example here? Another spectacular convergence had occurred outside jazz in rock, and it was not until black gospel and blues had fused with white country and western to produce a completely new form, rock and roll, that the line between the two positions. Okay, so good examples of the text focusing on the lyrics. This comes from Wagner, of the lyrics, the sound, the music, and how these came together. He's using those kinds of tools which Wagner said you really should do. He's doing it here, but he's applying it to popular culture and youth. Okay, but what he points out in a subtle way, that at the beginnings in the 50s is the absence of the blacks. The African Americans weren't present in England in a serious, thoughtful way. This, and then I add a quote here. It's a huge change in the 21st century, and today, especially after Brexit and the loss of the old British Empire, this really has changed since much of his writing. Nevertheless, it was beginning with what he had there. We find too the materialistic imagined by the young Brits, based quote here, heard in the vacant lots of the new British coffee bars, where, although filtered through a distinctly English atmosphere of boiled milk and beverages, it remained demonstrably alien and futuristic, as baroque as a jukebox on which it was played. And like those other sacred artifacts, the quiffs, the drapes, the grill cream, and the flicks, these came to mean America, a fantasy continent of westerns and gangsters, luxury, glamour, and automobiles. Okay, so the Teddy Boys, tapered trousers, long. These are quotes from him. Long jackets similar to post-war American zoot suits and fancy waistcoats were not popular with its target market, leaving tailors with piles of unsold clothing, which they combined here. So here's I looked these up to have at least one photo of the quiff. Okay, so you're having your hair stick up high, and then you can put in greasy, Vaseline brill cream to have it stick up high, and then go down to the rear. Okay. Bob Marley, the Jamaican musician, hugely popular, finally reappears as the missing man by Hepdig in his quote, page 69, as an internal critic of within British music, fighting the elitist punk and clothes and hairstyles. Okay, I'm not changing the topic. I'm adding the leading black sociologist of recent decades in our syllabus is Orlando Patterson. As a schoolboy in Jamaica, he's Jamaican, he learned to sing in the schoolroom in his schoolroom about Brits and slavery. He went to London, did his PhD on slavery, and analyzed culture and he has wonderful papers on how rap emerged from Jamaica, going to New York, then a bit to London, and then back to Jamaica. That is, rap combined not just singing with musical notes, but also, a lyrics of the words mattered, and it was a critical of the establishment, and behind that is a little bit, I'll show you just a bit here. The Jamaicans were the missing black face in the 50s in England, despite how much this has changed, and Orlando Patterson about how the music entered from Jamaica into England and is musically together for 8 years. Patterson, Orlando Patterson, was a special advisor to the Prime Minister, had the name of Michael Manley, but it was another Manley who was the musician. Let me play here just a little bit. Well, we have this. I think this is, yeah. Okay, here we are. I want to just give you a minute. Yeah, it's ready to there.
What crossroads have we reached? Where are we in world history, and how quickly has it changed?
Okay, now we got to go here too.
China in Chobon. So we're saying that Donald Trump accelerated a change in the global order that was coming anyway.
Just close that down.
There we go.
Engagements which you've arranged, and I'm really looking forward to
Orlando Patterson
discussions, starting with today.
Title: Slavery and Genocide.
I want to examine today a subject one of which I've been deeply involved with from the very beginning. As Marion mentioned, my first book, which was published way back in 1967, has been republished and recently, and on slavery. And that's been a major preoccupation. And as the biographical dialogue, as it's called, which is a book that's coming out in a few weeks, indicates, has been in many ways the existential and intellectual force of much of my thinking since then on freedom, the nature of freedom, on slavery elsewhere, on the problem of colonialism, decolonization, and also, of course, the source of my literary writing, since my second novel was, in fact, based on the materials I collected in my book on slavery, and thinking that this material is too good to be buried away in historical sociology. So I wrote a novel. So today
Okay. He said when he was in a school classroom in Jamaica, we would sing, "Hail Britannia, Britannia rules the waves." But let's look a little bit at how this musical example then led him to think about slavery as he spent his career on, did his PhD, and then from then on continued, as well as analyzing where and how the English sense of let's say English, I won't say values, themes, metaphors, elements, and then he elaborates this. I want to show that with a couple of videos here, because we don't. John at the beginning didn't like to do this, so I said, why don't we let's compliment each other. So one thing I've tried to do is to compliment and bring in some actual pictures of these folks. I'll just footnote. There's a great film made by Bourdieu himself. And and shows how he's dealing with his lead scholar, his best student at Berkeley, his professor at Berkeley, and when he wanted to publish his Chicago PhD in French, he said, "Please, I want to check over the translation into French, because it's going to be published here." And Bourdieu said, "No, we'll take care of it." He said, "No, but please, I want to look at my own book being in a language that's I speak French." Bourdieu says, "Don't worry about it, but please let me read my own page proofs." So he has You know, he shows himself attacking, beating down his leading student, you know, in you know, at Berkeley, who probably you overlapped with, etc. And so I think that the title was something like "Sociology as a Contact Sport." Okay, in that kind of sense. So these were the things which did not endear me so much to Bourdieu. Okay, how does this relate to Orlando Patterson? Orlando Patterson, we go, if I get the, I think I'm not sure I have it. If I go over here, I want to have the, somehow I don't have that. Okay, I'm trying to give you short snippets of several people and fast. And if I can't get this easily, maybe I'll try to give you the idea. The big idea, basically, is that the British were so racist that they basically essentially killed off. He has a table here with the Jews with the Holocaust. That only lasted from 1933 to 1945. Whereas in Jamaica, we were genocidally destroyed by the English through the entire history of Jamaica. And so he has numbers as if the number of Jamaicans who were killed, and he has multiple ways. He shows with, well, I won't try to get, so the British took over the island. He showed basically he's basically showing that the British treatment of the Jamaicans was worse than the Nazis of the Jews in the Holocaust. I mean, that's the bottom line of his story, which is a pretty, and so where else would he present this kind of presentation except perhaps Berkeley? I don't know. This was a lecture at Berkeley. But when he writes for the Wall Street Journal, he doesn't talk about that. Okay, anyway. So, but Patterson is very smart. As you, oops, here we see. Oh, sorry.
It's
He heard me say that. Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's push on, and how can we make sense of what he was saying here? And so I want to give you just a little competing ways of presenting the British musical tradition, in which hit him hard as a schoolboy in Kingston growing up. And okay, here we go. Oh, no, well, okay. Sorry, I've got it. I got it in a different order. Let's do this. This is the Jamaican music coming to.
It's okay. Protect your family's dreams under our roof. American Family Insurance.
So that's what I hope to. Okay, there we go. You can hear the word Kingston, as Hepdig says, you can't understand most of the words. Kingston, okay, I'll quit there. Okay, if this is what they brought to the English music, what had they brought to? This is where is English music. What's wrong with this? Nuts. Oh. This I want to show afterwards. So I want to, well, try, well, okay, I'll give you the, this word here. This is making fun. This is the English now punk-inspired critique of the British Empire within.
My God! It's ammo nitrate!
She's England's entry for the Eurovision Song Contest. She's my number one.
Okay.
My God!
Stop.
It's ammo nitrate!
No. Trying to stop there. Okay. Now, if that's out, this is out. Let's bring in. What are they reacting against? Don't I have it right here?
So what you look for, just to fill in about Orlando Patterson, so he's, was originally known as a historical sociologist, but he also is really interested in culture. I believe he's Andreas Glaser's PhD supervisor at Harvard. And he has taken a classically Harvard, but very, he's a real contrarian. There was long at Harvard an idea that there were class differences in values that were really important for stratification, and it was often read as blaming the victim by Berkeley types, and he has been foremost and first putting forward a view of culture that tries to be very multidimensional and complex, but also one that puts culture as a cause of stratification, not simply an effect of stratification. So he's always a little bit on the edgy side. He is he's very hard to predict. He doesn't fit the normal ways in which sociologists of culture fall into different kinds of patterns. With his argument that that some of the Terry, you stop me whenever you've got it pasted. Arguing that some of the problems of Black Americans come from cultural transmission. They're being passed on through culture, not through structural positions.
Yes.
Which is,
But-
remembered as the Moynihan. Oh, Jesus.
I'm not sure if this is going to work here.
Yeah, Elton John? No, it's not going to work.
We
You
are
even
not a
get that
traditional
insurance
cafe.
before
We're
you go
completely
to Elton
unconventional,
John.
and my Wix website
The
really
message
has to
is
capture
here.
the same magic. Hi, I'm Aaron. I'm the
Okay. We get the contrast. I mean, the simplified, but this was the elitist side of the British, and what Hebdig points out is we see with the movement away from the black influenced toward the more fantasy, imaginary, moving away from violence and heterosexual sex toward a more abstract relationship to passing through the night, whatever you want to do, and moving in the case of a number of these toward basically opening the door toward homosexuality. So in more generally diversity and the diversity issues, which were very much present with us today. The rigid demarcation of the line between punk rock and reggae is symptomatic not only of an identity crisis peculiar to the punk subculture, but also using these terms that we question as to whether these are appropriate. Well, but also of the more general contradictions and tensions within an open dialogue between an immigrant culture with a strong ethnic character and the indigenous working class culture, which technically enclose the black hole. On Bourdieu, okay, now this is Bourdieu and other stuff here. Benzacree, this is here. Here my key points. We can both elaborate. And John was it's reasonable to say you were a DJ. You knew this music.
How do you know that?
So he knows this stuff better than I do. So if you want to ask about individual, etc.
So yeah, if you didn't understand what Terry was saying. Hepdige is coming from this world, right, where they're looking for class and culture to line up in a different way from Bourdieu, right? It's about resistance. And these are originally subcultures. Stuff like rock and roll comes as a subculture, often with this kind of tense borrowing and competing relationship between different racial subcultures. And then Hebdig's talking about this change in the 70s to the glam rock. And so Hebdig's talking about Bowie, but Terry's putting up Elton John Lennon, but it is a really great way of illustrating this new thing. And when that song came out by John Lennon, that was widely old Beatles fans were disgusted because this was a very popular, catchy song, hit like #1, top of the charts with no point, no social criticism, but it was like Lennon making peace with the new glam world. So, and then he's doing it with Elton John, like totally awesome. And so in a way, Hebdig is, the thing that Hebdig hates about this is not just that it led to a lot of trashy music, because actually a lot of it is truly excellent, I think, right? But that it led to moving away from it meant that pop culture no longer fit Hebdig's theory. It was no longer about subcultures and resistance. It was no longer related to class, right? And so that's why Terry's saying, like, look what he says, what Bowie did. He took the class out. He took the gender out. All the things that a sociologist wants it to align with, it no longer aligns with. And so you have this great theory of looking at working class cultures of resistance. In Britain, a very class-oriented sociological perspective, and in a class-oriented society. And it's, what does it do with David Bowie?
Yeah. So another way to reframe this in terms of the other sections of the whole course is that what we have here in this case study of popular music in Britain, given the very distinctive British, there is a little bit of Marxism, and in some time periods it bumped up. But generally, the Marxist tradition is weak in England and in the U.S. By contrast, in France and Germany, Marxism played a major role in certain time periods and subgroups, especially leading into Bourdieu, but leading into many other class analyses, which we will go through. We've gone through, and we will go on through the course. But where and how within these sub-traditions do we have something that does go beyond the simplistic Marx and Engels? And we had, in the case of the German tradition, the major figure influencing both Adorno and Horkheimer was Walter Benjamin, his unpublished PhD, which they said don't try to defend it, but Benjamin's big concept was the flaneur. The flaneur was the gentleman walking with the ballerina on his arm, his top hat, looking at what's in the windows, choosing among the neckties, the umbrellas. They're bringing beauty into sociology. Now, he wasn't trying to write sociology, but even John Levy Martin brings in beauty. Marx did it perhaps, but he didn't celebrate it. Okay, Benjamin did. So where and how? So the bigger point I'm trying to say is where and how do the theories change, and where do the societies change, move in a more multi-causal direction? And as we know today, I mean, life is a lot more complicated than it was in the 50s, than it was in the 1930s, and is in the 1890s. You need a more subtle, complicated model in your head to understand what's happening right in front of this grounds in front of us, where we had the tents, people fighting over international issues in complicated ways. If we listen to the music, we have music where we may have Cambodian women Catholics singing woo with one kind of music, adding electronic music, adding with something which comes from, may have been sort of Elvis Presley, combined in a single song. You have these kinds of eclectic combinations of musical sets of, I won't say taste, that creation at least by people trying out and putting things together in new ways. And this ranges all the way from political culture, and I would say Trump, down to popular music and other things, the tools which we should try to develop should help you analyze all of these. Okay, that's my big theme, and then try to work this out with specifics. What we see today in the popular music started with British working class culture and with black Jamaican politics has been merged into the music through, as you mentioned, glam, the Beatles, and then moving up toward the present. We have different kinds of combinations that make it more subtle to try to classify simple theories and simple dichotomies. Okay, that's my bigger theme. Anything else we want to add with? Just two flash examples. I mentioned northern Paris, northern France with Paris, and southern France. Within France, these kinds of strong differences are there. Within the Marxist-specific tradition within Europe, after World War II, there was a strong leftist Marxist surge, especially in France. The French resistance had fought valiantly against the Germans, and the French Communist Party was charismatic, and the like in the 40s and 50s. The Communist Party at that time was Lenin and Stalin, and the French Communist Party followed them very directly. When the late 60s came along, when we had the green hair And we had these things coming from England, if you will, that you see with the teddy boys and the like coming along. That is clothes, makeup, hair color. These were critical things defining the differences in culture, and in culture in multiple senses. Political culture, the view that is political culture. In one sense, it was an election only 20 years ago. A leading youthful commentator at a TV and radio talk show. He had something like many millions of young people, and he said, "Don't vote, because these parties are just useless, and they don't show our views." And basically at the end he did say, okay, go maybe vote for the Labour Party, but basically that kind of withdrawal, a breaking away from the class and party distinctions in the same way that we could. Okay, so I'm saying if this came into France, the French said, "The hell with you." Okay. By contrast, in Italy and Spain, they said, initially there were 4 years or so when the feminists, the Greens, the environmentalists, and the human rights people went to the communist and socialist parties and said, why don't you have at least some green issues? Why don't you pay attention to these? And the communist and socialist parties in Germany and Italy said, no. So they became terrorists for about 4 or 5 years in Italy and Germany. At the end of that, they said, okay, join the party. And they created it, and they called it Euro-communism. And the leading Marxist, one of the leading Marxists in the urban area was Manuel Castells, professor at Berkeley for a while. And he was he was Spanish, Communist Party card-carrying member, but his career was in Paris. Social mobility. But when the Spanish Communist Party said, let's bring in the Greens and all these others, as did the Italians, and this is Euro-communism, Castells followed his Spanish communist background, and he followed that line. When he did this in Paris, they said, this is Paris. This is this was before 1989. This was French communism. We don't want any of this stuff. So therefore, he went to Berkeley. And he then began to study the new social movements of the environment, of human rights, and of technology and other kinds of themes. He completely reversed many of what things that he'd written before, which were dogmatic, I'd say simplistic Marxism. So these are examples of transformation among these ideological, interpretive, theoretical kinds of issues. Where and how when you put these together, after 1989, we have with the Berlin Wall, with Tiananmen Square. I'll even be a little politically incorrect and say, if we read the books, I won't even mention the name. If we read the books about Tiananmen Square, some of them will say we won't build on those American conceptions of political opportunity structure and those concepts for interpreting the new social movements. China's different. But if you then look more closely, many of them have followed these same concepts, when I teach a whole section on new social movements, they're the same basically. That is, they were many of the interpreters of the Tiananmen Square and its dynamics within China also saw one big factor, both in Europe and around the world, was the decline in the number of people who were working with their backs. People doing heavy, hard work where you need big thumbs, big fingers, strong backs, and these were the proletariat. The proletariat dropped by about half in size. This is not read, and that is, this is not written up in most of the ASR or AJS stories, but there's a drop. At the same time, we have a huge increasing in mass numbers of university students. C. Wright Mills at Columbia did a book called The Marxists, and his basic one-liner was, the new proletarians are students, university students. And Marty Lipset picked up on this as well, looking at what's happening in Berkeley, and did several books on student politics, and continue with that, as then did have a number of others. And so we have, in a sense, we have this today of the blue collar versus the, and so even I would add, the Democratic and Republican parties have partially reversed. The Democrats are no longer just representing blue collar workers. The Republicans are stealing, have stolen many of the, have succeeded in winning over many, that even many of the United Auto Workers, many of the states of traditional industry, Michigan, Pennsylvania, etc. These have, some of their leaders worked with Biden, but their members voted for Trump. Okay, so in this sense, the divisions have separated out with ethnic, occupational, class divisions have become more complicated than in earlier years. And you have to be able, and we need to be able to build frameworks and analysis models that can draw from Bourdieu, from Adorno, and use some of that, but also combine it with the punk combinations that have been put together in you can call an eclectic and rapidly changing style that was shown by the popularity of different kinds of music, which is presented in labeling it as glam or whatever else. Okay.
And so just because you went super fast of it, so the Birmingham school, the people like that Hepdig is talking to, they are this one kind of British Marxists, but they're not, unlike France, there's no strong communist party, there's no discipline, and they have this interest in looking at working class cultures as having their own kind of inherent, they're generators as opposed to failures. So with Bourdieu's watchword might be resistance is useless, right? Like everything comes from the top down, and the cultures of the dominated are just what's left over after all the good stuff has been taken. The British are looking at these cultures not only being cultures that resist domination in some ways, but that actually are they're generating the exciting, the interesting, as opposed to simply having the trashy.
I mean, I would say the text we read is very hard to see anything that's would not have been written by the hand of Karl Marx.
Well, so are there things we want to talk about on that? On the Hepdige?
He combined, that is, read it, that he combines things. That's the brilliance of his style, that he gives you a feel, and there's a strong aesthetic. You need to have an aesthetic action, an aesthetic sense, paying a lot of attention, paying, what kind of hair color, and the smell, all these things, the music is illustrated. Okay.
So I mean, he's a great example of this kind of class analysis, looking at resistance. This is not reliable, though. This was not. The research is preliminary. Later work suggests this is not actually a good. You want to understand how these cultures evolved and changed. This is not good enough, but it's still a great example of the Birmingham School. Pierre, did you?
it strikes me like this is like pretty like this isn't like just in opposition to Bourdieu, right? Like if you think about the way Bourdieu writes about it, and the way something like the savage piece talked about too, is like if you look at these fields, you can think of Bourdieu's writing also about the generative force of competition. Like the fact that if you're competing also in groups, and that creates this like, or like not groups, but like you create these like commonalities, and that can also be like a culture or a subculture. And I feel like there's like room for cross-pollination in these two theoretical frameworks, right?
I mean, there's certainly, that's what Terry would say. Terry loves cross-pollination. I don't think why, like if you got like a really good bottle of scotch, you don't want to make a cocktail of it. Like just, like, so I think if you've got good Marxism, who needs anything else? But the thing that Bourdieu, I think the thing that where there's a really big difference, and we didn't read it in this part, in distinction, is that Bourdieu says, he literally says somewhere, look, here's the thing about the dominated, they're also dominated in their brains, right? As Terry quotes Bourdieu, right? This is from the movie, but him talking to some proletariat and saying like, no, I know more about you than you know about yourself, right? So that's Bourdieu's way of thinking, and that's not the way the Birmingham School think is really different. No, there's the working class are always resisting. When they seem like they're not, you can secretly find that they are. So one of the problems is that lots of we see it even in this work, which I think is a great book, but he said like, you don't see it, but it's still there. It's there because you don't see it, that kind of stuff. Like, they were very good at making up things they wanted to see. But while they may have made up the things they wanted to see, they also didn't refuse to see the things that Bourdieu possibly refused to see, that there was spontaneity and independence from the official culture, right? So a small thing Terry just mentioned, France has a minister of culture, right? Like there's this idea that like this is something that could be centralized. Even though it's a democratic country, it had a somewhat non-democratic conception of culture officially. It doesn't mean it gets to put it into practice, right? But Bourdieu shares that idea. And the Birmingham School, the British people, have a very different idea. And they're not interested in high culture because they are interested in looking for resistance, and resistance is going to happen in popular cultures and subcultures, and most importantly in youth subcultures.
France has changed deeply. The Ministry of Culture was created by de Gaulle. The first Minister of Culture was André Malraux. Malraux was a novelist who'd written about Shanghai, brothels and the unusual life, let us say the underground life of Shanghai but Malraux's policies were de Gaulle's policies, which was the best of the top French culture must be I shouldn't say imposed, or dominated, but basically they were doing domination in that sense. How? Instead of having la province, of the provinces being separate, they were given culture houses. They created Maison de la Culture, which they had in all of the biggest and middle-sized French cities, where they built culture houses. But what did they perform? They sent the best Parisian shows, the best music, the best stars were sent on a tour. So they'd be 3 days or a week in Lyon, then they'd go to Nancy, then they'd go to Marseille, and so forth. That was bringing the top best culture to all of the country. That, in that sense, that's a Mao equal spreading, so that the Chinese follow the same egalitarian kinds of policy, and having in China, there are roughly 3,000 counties, and they each have a library, a cultural center, which could be a little bit like the French one here, or a museum. And these three are found in all. That is, in this sense, the idea was that every Chinese or every French citizen should have the equal ability to have access to the best of our national cultures. Okay. 15 years or so later, the world had changed in the directions that I've been talking about and where we are now. But Jack Lang was the Minister of Culture, and what he basically said was, what we did in the past in the Ministry of Culture, we are totally changing. We're encouraging all kinds of individualistic, local cultures, activities, including recognizing foreigners and other groups that migrate to here, and we give them, you know, that is, it was totally anti, I will say, de Gaulle, or anti, I won't say Bourdieu, but it was the opposite of what Bourdieu was describing as dominated. That is, Bourdieu was writing under de Gaulle in that sense, and I mean that's when I knew him, when he was young, and that hierarchy was there. After 68 destroyed de Gaulle. 68 destroyed the sort of the legitimacy of this kind of hierarchy, and after that, drastically changed. Okay. So what I'm suggesting we therefore need is add explicitly in terms of models. We need the context. Where and why is there a context of the Ministry of Culture following a Gaullist perspective, or moving to a Jack Lang decentralized, multi-causal kind of approach? And we need to have we need to recognize, we need to have built into our theories, our frameworks, and we need to go beyond the name of France or China. We need to have some more abstract concepts like hierarchy. And if hierarchy goes down, as it did with the Ministry of Culture in France, we're having mass increases in the proportion of the population in China. That is, the small town peasants of China have drastically decreased. Many have migrated to cities, or their children. But then when some of those who do well go to universities, they get even if they drop out, there are a large number of alienated younger Chinese who are not really following hierarchy. In that sense, they're a little, okay. I won't try to say any more about China. Enough to say simply that there are some of these processes which are found within. That is, this is a non-socialist system. These are not being driven just by capitalism, is my suggestion. The bigger point of this, you have the same dynamics within families in ways that trying to point to socialism versus capitalism doesn't help so much. So I'm using the Euro-communism. I'm using my field work with Tito, with Yugoslavia, with the changes from East Germany to as a separate country, to integrating the rest of Germany, and these having the German party systems now are complicated by virtue of these residues, which are closer to the Russian background in the east of Germany. Okay. Yes.
I actually have questions back to the subculture things, and I'm thinking that maybe it's my misunderstanding, but I'm thinking sometimes it seems subculture here, I'll say symbolic resistance or something like that, seems like one uniform or say quite similar kind of lifestyle. But I'm thinking about like the ambiguity of arts. For example, like maybe R&B in here is more likely to be some kind of maybe.
So I'm having a hard time hearing because there's a lot of noise outside. Can you just repeat and be a little louder?
No, because I'm thinking like the ambiguity of arts is like, because here for US actually R&B is something like maybe more mainly for like African American, but like R&B in China is more likely to be some kind of pioneer art in some people's kind of idea. And in other cases, I'm thinking there are some kind of songs in China. It's like they are ambiguous. They are not directly talking about homosexual, but they are somehow seen as some kind of gay icon or the homosexuality, and we are trying to use these things somehow, not protest, but showing some kind of the identity there. So I'm thinking like art is not like something that's uniform kind of thing, but like we can actually interpret it in different ways. And in that case, like some people are trying to use one single culture, or say one single art, or say one single song, different kind of purpose to do different kind of thing. So sometimes I'm thinking, maybe it's my misunderstanding, but I'm thinking this kind of idea of symbolic resistance is like, I don't know, but like it seems like to say that one song can only be interpreted as one kind of way to do it. But actually, I think maybe there are multiple ways to do it. I don't know.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think we definitely agree, and I think that there's two things. So I Terry said a little while ago, we have to look both at how theories have changed, but then also how the societies have changed. I think that's a really important point here. So the Birmingham school, these British people, they're working in, they're trying to hold to a vision of society in which there's clear class differences first, that working class people have had working class parents and working class grandparents and working class great grandparents, right? And that they've lived in similar, same kind of places for a long time. So first, that whole way of thinking does experience greater and greater stress when, as Terry says, the proportion of people who are recognizably proletarian starts to really shrink in these societies. Second, it's looking at the development of subcultures from the more or less spontaneous actions of youth groups, right? And that's not wrong. So when punk emerges from glam, right? This is in England where this is happening. This is happening in very small clubs that are owned by locals, and there's no major industry involved here, right? That does not happen after the 1980s. Like there are of course there are always cultural changes that come here, but the idea that an entire genre is going to emerge and become dominant, that's not being driven by corporate investment, doesn't really make sense, right? Some of these things they're fully international. Punk was already somewhat international in the early years, but now the locality is, the relationship of locality is really different. We're going to get to this when we look at Jennifer Lena's work in a couple of weeks. So it's not really clear that this way of thinking can be transported. What people have tried to transport is exactly this idea of resistance, but it turns out that this is a really slippery concept. So you'll notice that when Hepdig likes something, like you can really tell. He likes it when they're resisting, and they should be like, working class kids should be like making trouble and scuffing and being at least sarcastic or rude. And he really hates David Bowie and Glenn for not doing that, right? David Bowie's from like a working class or lower middle class background, but he's like, I don't want to do that. I'm not gonna dress like a worker. I'm not gonna dress ironically like a worker. I'm not gonna dress like a proletarian. So Hebdig hates that because he gets to call what's resistant. And so we've had real problems where people have tried to take this to popular culture and then interpret stuff like that's being made by multi-million-dollar corporations as if it were some kind of resistance, and it becomes very paradoxical, right? So big debates over like, is Madonna like for capitalism, is Madonna against capitalism? Is she resistant or is she not? Is she for patriarchy or against patriarchy? And I think the cultural studies world took that question on and only could generate paradox. Sociologists didn't, but then I think your point is it leaves us in a kind of a place without clear direction, how we understand culture when the same cultural object can have wildly different meanings. and it can be misinterpreted. That's another, like a fascinating thing, is lots of generative cultural change comes from people misinterpreting things, taking something that was meant ironically and interpreting it. So Don Quixote is a classic example of something that was written as a satire, but for a long time was read as an adventure. Pierre?
Well, so I was thinking about this when I was reading this. I was like, okay, like something that I loved about the piece is how it kind of looked at like how different demographic factors were like coming together. Like it was age and it was race and it was class. It wasn't like determined. I was like kind of wondering, okay, but a lot of those have then like become commercialized later on, and I was kind of thinking about like what is it now that could fulfill that sort of subcultural role. And it did strike me that it's that the online world has like sort of taken that place. You know, like one way to look at it as well is like what kind of like moral panics have been generated more recently. They often center out like the digital sphere, like gamers becoming shooters, conspiracy theories, the far right subgroups like 4chan or like all these fringe message boards. And it's and you also see it in the fact that whenever that becomes appropriated by the commercial sphere, that's still in a kind of wonky way. Like things like the Minecraft movie are being like ridiculed online just because it's still like something that hasn't been able to be like fully sort of commercialized, right? Like sometimes it is, like sure video game franchises are like huge $1 million enterprises, but some of the online message boards online still seem to fulfill that sort of subcultural resistance. And I was wondering if like that was a way to sort of transport this theory and not think about these like real concrete physical spaces, but also like differences between like digital and real spaces of like a transformation of this subcultural sphere.
YouTube broadcasts Trump giving a meeting with his cabinet and talking about what's happening with their the Secretary of Defense you're doing a good job and so forth. That's the top part of your screen. Down there, YouTube is broadcasting commentaries by any kind of I don't know how they choose them, but there are people, but most people are wildly critiquing Trump and the administration and what he just said. He's a liar. He said another crazy, stupid thing. How he can kick him out, etc. So you have this combinations of these. So I'm deliberately going into visible, passionate ideology, as well as that is even if we don't make our theories as messy as this, at least we have to recognize the data are there. And so Hebdig may dislike personally or whatever, but he describes David Bowie. He describes that David Bowie and these people moved away from their social background. They couldn't explain the elitist style of David Bowie and others based on being proletarian. That is, the Bourdieu model fails. And so in that sense, I say this is an English version of Benjamin's flaneur. And so it's great to have English popular, and because it was around the world. It was influenced by the U.S., but it had a big impact as well within the U.S. In turn. There was a lot of it came back in rock and roll and the blue collar bits of style that came into with the so-called angry young men. That label was part of which still continues, and it was then connected with rap and hip hop, especially among African Americans who are so Lipset, in Lipset's book, which talks about American values, he has 2 chapters in the book. It's called the book is called American Exceptionalism, but he has national values, which are individualism, egalitarianism, rising by your own, pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, achievement. That these kinds of things are general American values. But then he has 2 chapters which says, well, this doesn't work for blacks, and it doesn't work for Jews, and it doesn't work for Japanese, but they react in turn to what's happening within the rest of America around them. And so my point is we need to be able that is, Lipset could see that there, even though he'd moved from Berkeley to Harvard. He made this analytical change, but he also wrote a history of Harvard. but starting, I think, 1643, whatever, in the first few years of Harvard, the students went on strike. They had a student protest, 1640, So this is not just after the late 60s. It goes that universities have been challenging and thinking new things and creating some of this since the beginning.
It seems to me though that the analog to would not be, that is, if you want to talk about the kind of new forms that online spaces make possible, where there's talk, that's sort of the analog to the coffee house. Unfortunately, we couldn't read, we had to cut Habermas's great book on the public sphere. We're not seeing a new genre, a new art form genre come up there, but we are we have seen that. In particular, the capacity for people to share short videos. So YouTube for a while was a generator of a new kind of art form because it was very peer-to-peer. It's not anymore. It's been flooded out. But then Vine, I don't know if you even know, but Vine was a platform for very short videos, like 10 seconds long. And people started making with their phones these really creative videos and sending them to each other. And it was a new genre that had not existed. And then TikTok also now there's a genre that really is associated with TikTok of the one person making a very low budget video where they play all the characters. It's like 15 seconds to a minute long or something like that.
Well, that's things like memes or that's like a new visual form that emerged from these subspaces.
Exactly, like the lolcat meme in particular. The thing is that looking for these things in terms of resistance is always a dangerous issue, because what we found is that anybody can call anything resistant. So if working class people say the bourgeoisie sucks, that's resistance. But if working class people say, I love the bourgeoisie, I want to be part of the bourgeoisie, that's called resistance too. It was you're not supposed to want to be part of it, you're supposed to be a good proletarian and not do it, right? And so this is you'll find hundreds of agonized books and articles trying to deal with gangster rap. This is one of the things that Patterson wrote about. He takes a very dim view of. Is it resistance? Is it collaboration? But the one thing, so these just come down to value judgments. The one thing we know is that this is big money, right? These things are driven, not created by, but driven by the same profit-making corporations that drive everything else. The people who own Sony own General Electric or whatever. So I think we could separate. This is what I want to say. We could separate the question of where do we see subculture spontaneously arising and new genres emerging from the question of class culture and resistance, because the first we know how to study. The second one seems like it's kind of arbitrary.
Right. I mean, also does all resistance have to be class related? Can't there be something that I'm wondering is when is it just deviance and when is it just resistance? Because people talk about misogynist far right channels. There's a form of cultural resistance where they try to carve out their space.
Exactly.
But that's not class related. So.
And do we call it resistance? So, for example, the Trump administration is, I think, widely seen as being one of the ones that's most hostile to gay rights of any since the 1970s, and yet Trump's theme song is from the Village People, and it's a celebration of gay sex. The Village People were incredibly popular because they could be read in two ways. A lot of Americans didn't understand that the Village was Greenwich Village, and the reason these were stock characters of gay culture. And Trump dances to the YMCA song, right? Is the Village People resistance? Was it camp? Is there a difference? We don't know, right? People can call it either way. Is it monetizing a culture, or is it, who knows, right? but certainly, yeah. So it doesn't have to just be class, and a lot's been written about gender and race resistance too. So yeah.
Oh, so
JS.
I have two ideas about that. The first one is I just feel like this kind of obsession with resistance as a virtue is kind of related to like in the 1970s or 1960s, this kind of like class struggles and counterculture movement become very heated. So after that, there seems like some remnant like the resistance become super cool and everyone should stay like they are resistant. But I'm thinking about another thing is also about like the internet space. I want to ask like if there's the turning point is either in the subculture book or in the other things, a turning point of the commercialization of the subculture, because like subculture really like reminds us of the culture industry, but I don't know. But the culture industry is just about the mainstream culture. But it seems that on the online internet platform, I mean, when some subculture emerge, there definitely have new subculture emerge. Like people are drawing about their own persona and exchange that online. I mean, there's lots of things of that, or certain kind of like aesthetics of photos and dark academic styles, but it goes like immediately become like commercialized, and it seems that like the algorithm will push new type of fashion just in order to make profit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, wait. Let me cite I have a student who did a MA. He's an expert on this internet issue because he followed one Chinese website which followed the aesthetics of especially photography, of beauty, and they would discuss beauty in terms of aesthetic concerns. If anyone tries to introduce a material interpretation of saying they make more money or it is becoming commercialized, they cut that off. That is, this is explicit, that they will not permit this if you will Veblen-esque conspicuous consumption interpretation of the I will have more money if I do that. That is, many of the activists are photographers of young people with universities, maybe in background. But the point is, even this is within China. This is supervised by the government. It is accepted as a reasonable approach, but it is the opposite of what many of the theories which we are also discussing. And it's not commercial. You know, the internet in that sense, they're not selling anything. So in that sense, I would say it's closer to the spirit which I'm trying to point toward in Hepdig and in Benjamin and within Castells. They came from Marx, but they added more to it. And Marx himself was subtle enough and smart enough. All these people we're reading are subtle and smart if you dig a little further. Adorno as well as Marx himself. I mean, Marx read he read Goethe, he read Shakespeare, and the tools in his footnotes, his labels of the definition of the lumpen proletariat. Look at the lyrical words that Marx himself wrote.
So we're actually going to be getting back to this because one of the interesting things that I think is going on in sociology of culture these days is trying to look at the relationship between the early formation of scenes, the crystallization of genres, and then how those can turn into things that are sort of amenable to commercialization. Because there are both new genres that come from mainstream commercial, like the folks who are already popular, making innovations that lead to new new genres. So they're not trickling up, but then there are these places where things come before, they exist before they are commercializable. What I think is we don't have enough work on is two things. One, it's the kind of the work that can't be commercialized because of something inherent in the nature of the product. So performance art has been incredibly hard to commercialize, and many of the things that are hard to commercialize end up in universities, like poetry. No poet can live off their poems, so either they're independently wealthy or they have university teaching positions. Another I think is really interesting is fan fiction. Because of its flagrant violation of copyright, businesses can't touch it, and so it's this really well-developing genre that has its own stars. It seems like it's often, there's commerciality in that people are getting paid for writing fan fiction by their readers often, but it can't be grabbed by a big industry. And shoot, we're out of time. I'll have to save the second part for next week. So maybe we can come back to this issue because business gets involved. It's hard to know who's leading whom. Who's in charge, who's on first.
The term popular need not imply commercial.
Mm-hmm.
Two different concepts.
Mm-hmm.